Hello, what is up, YouTube? It's Ismail Rodriguez here, bringing you another beginner Python video. Today we're going to be covering variables, operators, numbers, and strings. And with that being said, let's get started. Alright, now to start off, we're going to make a new file. So go to the top left, click on New File, and now we have the new file, but make sure to save it. Give it a name, call it whatever. .py. Oh, also, if you don't want to put in the .py, you can also go down here and save as type. Go all the way down to where the p's are, and look for Python. And if you do that, it'll automatically save the name of your file as a Python file, so you don't have to write the .py at the end. And yeah, alright, so for the first topic of this video, we're going to be talking about variables. So what are variables? So variables can be seen as storage boxes they can give names to. Variables can store numbers and strings, and you might be thinking strings like a rope kind of string, and I'll tell you no. Strings is just basically a fancy name for anything that's surrounded by a pair of quotation marks, and that probably confuses you, but don't worry, we're gonna cover strings later on in this video, and yeah, don't worry about it yet. So how do you make a variable? So to make a variable, you give a name and a value. So let's say we want to make a variable, and remember, a variable is just a storage box with a name to it. So we want to make a variable called number, and inside this storage box, we're going to store the number 4. So how do we do that? So how you do that in Python is put the name first, and then you put the value. And now you may look at this and you'll be like, hey, you didn't say anything about an equal sign. What's up with the equal sign? And yeah, I didn't say anything about the equal sign because I didn't want to confuse y'all. But basically the equal sign tells the computer that we're about to make a variable. The equal sign tells the computer that whatever's to the left of it is going to be the name of the variable, or the name of our storage box. And whatever's to the right of it is going to be the value that's going to be stored inside of our variable, or stored in our storage box. So this is telling the computer we're going to have a variable called number, and it's going to have the number 4 in it. Or we're going to have a storage box called number, and we're going to put the number 4 inside of it. And if you want to verify if it's actually working out, your variable, you can just put a print statement and put print the name and put the name of the variable, in this case number, and just run your program. So click on the green arrow top right, and you'll see that we get the number 4. And how does that exactly work? So right here the computer sees the print statement, and it says, okay, print. What are we gonna print? We're gonna print number. Okay, number. What's number? Number's a variable. Okay, so what's inside number? Number 4. So then the computer says, okay, so we're just going to print 4, or print number, which number equals 4, and we get 4. If you want to see another example of a variable, let's call our next variable pi, and we're going to give it the value of 3.14. So right here we said, let's make a storage box with the name pi, and inside of it we want it to have the number 3.14. And if we want to, let's verify that it's working out. So we say print pi. Click on the green arrow, and down here you see that you have the number 4 from this print statement, and you have the value 3.14 from this print statement. And if you want to go over it again, what is this saying? It's saying, okay, computer reads it. It says print what? Pi. Okay, what's pi? Pi is a variable. What's inside the variable, or storage box? Inside of it we have 3.14. So the computer says, okay, print 3.14, which is exactly what we get down here. And yeah, that's a variable. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about numbers. So what are numbers? So numbers are exactly what you think of them. 1, 2, 3, 12, 14, those are numbers. 1.5, that's a number. 6.9, that's a number. That's a number. And yeah, that's a number. But the funny thing with numbers in programming languages is that there are different types of numbers. So right here we have integers and we have floats. And if you just highlight it, Python or VS Code tells you that this is the number 2 and it's an int. Int is short for integer. And an integer is any number, positive or negative, that just simply does not have a decimal point. A fraction is just a number without a decimal point or a fraction. And if we go over here to this one that has a decimal point, Python tells us, VS Code tells us, it is a float. And you might be saying, what's a float? And to that I'll tell you that a float is just a number that has a decimal, a fraction. It's a float. And you might be wondering, why didn't they just call them like decimals? And to that I'll tell you, I don't know. It's just what the programmers or the math people decided to call them because they wanted to make this so much harder. But decimals, numbers with decimals are floats. See right here, 6.9, float. Numbers without decimals, without fractions, are ints. Even this huge number is an integer. And there's also this other thing called a complex number. But that's for like higher level math stuff, so you don't really have to worry about it. And honestly, you don't really have to worry about knowing the number types. But just put it in like that area of your brain where you can like vaguely remember it, just so in the future you're not surprised when you learn that, oh hey, this number without a decimal is an integer and this number with decimal is a float, you know? And yeah, that's it for numbers. Okay, so now for the next topic of this video, we're going to be talking about strings. So what are strings? Strings are basically anything that's surrounded by a pair of quotation marks. I know that doesn't make too much sense, but luckily I can show you what I'm talking about. So this is a string. Let's make a variable first. And let's call the variable my first string. Alright. So a string is anything surrounded by a pair of quotation marks. So we have our pair of quotation marks, and if we just do that, we actually have our string. And if you click on my first string, it tells you to the up above you get a little box and it says my first string with a colon. And to the right of the colon it says stir in green. Stir means string. It's short for string. And you just made your very first string. If I did apples are good, it is still. You run it, it is still indeed a string. If you did apples are good times 100, you run it, it is still a string. If I took it all this away and I just put it here and I run it just to make sure Python is processing it, the code that is written on it, it is still going to say a string. If I took the quotation marks away from this number, it is now going to be a integer, which is a number. If I put the quotation marks back, Python is still going to say, or Python is now going to say that this is a string because it has the quotation marks. So if you want to know how Python is reading this, how it's processing it, it's basically saying, okay, so like when we were making variables in the beginning, here's our variable and it's going to be called my first string. And then we have the equal sign, and then we have our value that's going to be stored inside of our variable. But when Python sees this first quotation mark, it says, okay, I'm going to get ready for a string. This is the beginning of the string. And then it just looks through what's inside the string and is currently looking for another quotation mark. Once it finds this other quotation mark, it says this has to be the ending of the string. And it says, okay, so everything inside of here is a string, or is part of the string. That's why when we did 1000 and just do this, you know, apples, it doesn't complain at all. It just says, okay, this is a string. Still a string, as you see the green stir. It just says, okay, here's the beginning quotation mark. Kind of doesn't really care of what's inside, doesn't care about the spaces. It's just looking for the other quotation mark. That way it knows where the ending of the string is. That is how it processes a string. And if you notice, in the beginning of the video when we did hello world, we also put these quotation marks around hello world. In reality, we were printing a string. And although this might look different, let's see, let's run it. So we have hello world, and then we have 1000 whatever apples. Although this might look different, it is still technically the same, because it looks at the print statement says my first string. Okay, what's my first string? Okay, here's my first string, and then it has this string inside of it, and it says, okay, so I'm gonna print this. Right here, it just saved it. Python just saved itself a step because they didn't have to look up what my first string was. So now you might be saying, so teacher, a string is basically anything that has a pair of quotation marks around it? And I'll say, yeah, it is. And I, the teacher and senpai, can answer more of your questions. So then you might say, okay, so if that's a string, does this mean this is also a string? And I'll say, yes, of course it is. And then you might say, okay, is this a string? And I'll tell you, it actually isn't. If you actually run it, Python's gonna complain. It's gonna say syntax error, and syntax meaning that we worded something wrong. You know, we have something wrong in terms of our text. And it says EOL, which means end of line, while scanning string literal. And right there is just saying that it couldn't, or you confused it, because it can't find the end of our string, because it looks at this quotation mark. It says, okay, this is the ending string. I mean the ending quotation mark, and then you have another quotation mark, and Python's like, what are you doing? This was supposed to be the end of the string. What are you doing with this other quotation mark? If you just take away that, delete both of them. If you take away that quotation mark, just one of them, you run it, Python is no longer going to complain to you, because it knows where the beginning and the end of the string is. And now if you say this, if you were to ask me, is this a string? And I'll say, crap, can't be like this. Can't be like this. What do I do, Google? What do I do? Come on. I mean, DuckDuckGo, what do I do? Why are you being so slow? Come on. God dang it. I don't want to. Come on. There we go. Student has a crush on me. How do I tell him to stay the away? Student has a crush on me. Brr. Student has a crush on me. Should I seek help? What do I do? FBI, open up! And I'll tell you, yes, that is indeed a string. Although it might be a bothersome string to me emotionally. And yeah, now you basically know how to use strings. Alright, so now for a little bonus on this topic about strings. Let's say you actually wanted for Python to print out these quotation marks, because you wanted to show that it's a direct quote for whatever reason. And if you actually wanted to do that, you just got to put these backward slashes, and they should be above your enter key. You just put those in, and if you see, the color actually changes to yellow. And that basically tells Python when it's scanning through that this quotation mark is not going to be our ending quotation mark, and we actually want to do something with it. And if you decide to print it by running, if you look at it right here, it says Sensei, I have a crush on Bob, and it has the quotation marks surrounding Bob. And yeah, that's how you do that. Alright, so now for the final topic of this video, we're going to be talking about operators. So what are operators? So operators is just a big, fancy, confusing name that math people or I guess the programmers decided to call mathematical symbols. And yeah, that's basically what an operator is. I'm only going to go through some of the operators because I don't want to overwhelm you with all the different types of operators. And besides, the other operators will make a lot more sense when we actually get to applying them. So yeah, let's go through some of the operators. The operators differ on how they work, but depending on if we're working with numbers or strings. We're only going to go through numbers and strings at the moment. So with a number, if we did, we're going to put these in print statements, that way we can see the output. So we did 1 plus 1, that will work exactly as you would expect it to. We're going to get 2. Addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, those operators, those math symbols would work exactly as you would expect them to in a math class. So we did 1 minus 1, we'll get 0. If we did 1 times 1, we'd get 1, since 1 times 1 is 1. If we did 1 divided by 1, the slash represents division, we get 1.0. And I'll include this one in. What is it? 3 double asterisk. When you do double asterisk, it actually means to the power of. So right here it's saying 3 to the power of 2, which would equal 9. And there you go, we got 9. And now you might be saying, okay, so that's cool, that's how operators work with numbers, but how do they work with strings? And I'll show you how they work with strings. Actually, the only 2 operators that I think are worth knowing at this point is just the addition operator and the multiplication operator. So what happens when you use the addition operator, it concatenates 2 strings together. And you might be wondering, what is concatenate? And that again is another word that programmers decided to use to make everything sound a lot more confusing. But what that word means is basically merge. So if we made 2 strings and we're going to store them in a variable called final. So let's say 1 comes, and then we do the other string before 2. If we wanted to concatenate these strings, aka merge, we use the addition operator. And if we run it, Python will have no complaints because it will say, that makes sense to me. And if we want to see what's happening, we just say print final. Because whatever this ended up being, resulting in, is going to be stored in final, in our storage box called final. So if we run it, you're going to see that we get 1 comes before 2. And that happened because we used the addition operator to merge, concatenate these 2 strings together. And you might be wondering, how come there's no space between comes and before? And the answer to that is basically because there's no space between the 2 strings after comes and no space before the word before. Now if we were to do that and we ran it, we would get 1 comes before 2, this time with a space in between. And if we put a space right before we ran it, this time you see we got 2 spaces. And that is how that works. Now how the multiplication operator works is that with strings, the multiplication operator repeats the string however many times you specified. So if we did 1 times, and we're going to put times 2, this is saying we want the string to be repeated twice. And if we run the program, we see we get 2 1s. The string 1 repeated twice. We're going to store the result in final, and then we're going to print final, and we get 1 1. And now if we wanted to do 1 times 100, we're going to get 100 ones. If we put a space in between them, that way you can see, I don't know, it looks nicer. You see we have a bunch of ones. If we did it with burr, we get a bunch of burrs. It's that simple. And yeah, that's operators. Okay, so that's the end of this video. Give it a like if you liked the video. Give it a dislike if you disliked it. Leave a comment if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Make sure to give me some feedback in those comments. If you want to keep following this channel as well as this series, make sure to give this channel a subscribe. And that is it. I'll see y'all in the next video.